the appetite is spreading.
You see rent control popping up politically when housing prices and rents are going up.
Among the cities currently considering some form of rent control are Chicago, Philadelphia, Providence, and Denver. Oregon recently became the first state to pass a rent control bill. A statewide proposition in California failed, but some cities there are moving ahead on their own. A recent report by a consortium of affordable housing advocates says that if all the proposed rent control legislation were to pass, nearly 1 in 3 American tenants would gain some kind of rent protection. Today on Freakonomics Radio, how well does rent control work? As with many complicated issues that have multiple actors and crossed incentives, the answer depends on whom you ask.
Well, I'm in favor of residential rent control and rent regulations.
If you were starting from scratch and you were designing the most efficient rent regulation system, what would that look like?
Short of bombing, I know of no way to destroy a city that was more effective than rent control.
From Stitcher and Dubner Productions, this is Freakonomics Radio, the podcast that explores the hidden side of everything. Here's your host, Stephen Dubner.
Most economists say that rent control is a bad idea, as is just about any form of price control. They believe that markets work best when supply and demand are allowed to find a natural equilibrium, with price acting as the referee. Here's one such economist.
My name is Ed Glazer, and I am the Fred and Eleanor Glimp Professor of Economics at Harvard, where I teach both microeconomic theory and the economics of cities.
Ed, you have
Looks good.
1 minute
Okay.
to convince someone that rent control is a terrible idea. Go.
Yeah, everything's good. Oh, yeah, wrong mouse.
All right, so they've already squandered 5 of my seconds. It's not
Rent control.
particularly fair. It's not
Oh.
a good way of allocating scarce space.
Yeah.
It's not a good way of helping
there it
the
goes.
downtrodden. It's a way that freezes a city and stops it from adjusting to change. It's a way that freezes people in apartments and stops the motion that is inherent in cities.
Ooh.
So that's a baseline economic take, at least. Let's try to unravel this issue, starting with a
I don't
brief
think I
history
need-
of
well-
rent control.
Rent control
That would
is
probably be a good
became
one.
ubiquitous in World War II. And the idea here
Oh,
was
yeah,
the
it's a new
nation
convene, too, I
was,
think.
Laying down
Sorry.
its life to try and
Oh, yeah, okay.
bring freedom to the world.
2
And
characters.
it seemed wrong that some people
And
who
then
were well
these.
placed should earn some form of
Wow, there's
extra
hardly
bonus
anything.
by being able to raise up rents.
Which one's the better one?
People maybe whose sons and daughters were off fighting for the U.S. elsewhere, and rent control was seen as being a way of somehow or other trying to keep America being a bit fairer during World War II. Now, lots of places introduced rent control during this period. After the war, most of them got rid of it because that cause seemed to be a little bit less pressing. But some cities kept it, and New York, of course, is the most famous place that still has it.
Glazer himself grew up in New York.
And, I lived in a rent-stabilized unit for the first 10 years of my life. I mean, something like 74% of New York City's households were renters in those days. And indeed, the mid-1970s was an era in which New York's housing didn't seem that expensive. And so affordability just wasn't the same issue that it was today. Now, flash forward 30 years, the cities have been enormously successful. They haven't built enough to accommodate the new demand. They risk becoming boutique towns affordable only to the wealthy. And people are desperate to see that those cities don't, push out every poor resident, that they don't become monocultures built around the privileged
Creator
and rich.
dashboard.
And rent control appears to be at least one avenue for doing it. But it's a very blunt instrument.
Just how blunt? There are decades worth of economic research describing the downsides of rent control. The first major
Hey,
paper was
yo,
written
there's
in
people here. Okay.
1946 by Milton
That's why I
Friedman
wanted to
and
open
George
YouTube
Stewart.
chat.
Here's Friedman.
Yo, what's up?
Rent control is a law that supposedly is passed to help the
Cool,
people
cool. Said hi.
who are in housing. And it does
1, 2,
help
and
those
3
who are in
top
current housing.
chatters.
But the effect of rent control is to create scarcity and to make it difficult for other people. to
Okay,
get
I got both
housing.
chats kind
Where
of.
did this
well,
scarcity
actually, I'll
come
pop this
from?
one out.
For one, developers had less incentive to build new housing if there was a ceiling placed on
pop
what they
out.
could charge. Friedman also argued that rent control created a haphazard and arbitrary
Oh, yeah, both chats
allocation
next to each
of
other.
space. This was echoed in a 1972 paper by Edgar Olson, which found that rent control led to what economists
I'm just
call
listening
an
to like a podcast I'm
overconsumption
having to do
of
for
housing.
class.
Let's say you rented an apartment in New York in
Got off work early, so
1955. You had 3 small kids. You rented a
trying to do both
three-bedroom.
at once.
It was perfectly
know,
matched.
probably
to
not the best
needs of
idea, but, you know.
with your kids growing up. They moved out of the house
Play
in
some
the early
games and
70s. By
chill
the
out.
late 80s, maybe your husband or wife actually died, and you're living on your own in a 3-bedroom apartment in New York.
Oh yeah, okay, so it does show
My
up on there.
goodness, would you ever
Cool.
move out? Your rent is a fraction of what the market rent is. Right, one of my favorite stories about this
How's
is
everyone
quoted
doing?
by
How was
Ken
everyone doing?
Ouletta's The Streets Were Paved with Gold. He cites Nat Sherman, the famous tobacconist to the world, who had this big shop on Fifth Avenue, who said that, he pays, I forget what it was,
$355 a
Cool.
month for
Nothing
a
there.
6-room apartment, it says here.
That's what all the
Isn't that
events
amazing?
are.
Keep in mind, it's a few decades ago. It's an unbelievable deal. Now, what's
Crosslands?
outrageous about this is he then says, I think it's fair
Oh, yeah,
because
the
I use
trials.
it so rarely.
So these are two new
Which
characters, and then
means that
these are
he's
just
not
extra
getting very
stuff.
much value out of it.
See
But
how
the
they
crazy
play.
thing about this is there were lots of New Yorkers who would love to have that apartment and who would get a lot more value out of it.
In 1997, Ed
We're
Glazer
talking
did
about-
his own analysis of rent control in New York City,
Yeah,
trying to
rent
determine
control.
just how
It's for one of our
economically
discussion
inefficient
posts.
it was. He and his co-author, Erzo Luttner,
So the
found
benefits
that,
and negatives
quote,
of having
this
it.
misallocation of bedrooms leads
How
to
having, like, a
loss
free
of
market would be,
revenue well over $500
better
million
in the sense of
annually to the
pricing.
consumers of New York before we even consider social losses
Like,
due
you know,
to
Invisible Hand
supply
kind of
and
does its own thing.
Glazer's
Doesn't
work
fully
has
control
also
it, but who
inspired
knows?
a new generation of economists to further the literature on rent control.
This guy's kind of nuts.
Historically, people relied much more on theory in making their arguments about rent control.
That's Rebecca Diamond again. She's a former student of Ed Glazer.
Because even without a lot of data, you can make some pretty simple theoretical predictions about what rent control might do to a housing market.
Oh, he uses
There's
the, oh, he
something
uses that one.
theory
Okay.
alone cannot tell you.
One of the biggest open questions
So far,
in
I
the
mean, these ones are
literature
just. What's
of
in
rent
there?
control is what happens to those tenants that get rent control. Really, how much are the renters benefiting? Because they're the potential big winners of
Who are
rent
these
control. And to measure that,
I'm ugly.
you really need to have
Oh
data
no. Some
on
bots.
where
Straight
everybody
bots in the
lives,
chat.
and who gets access to rent control, and whether they decide to stay in that rent controlled apartment or go somewhere else. And traditional data sources that economists work with very rarely
Switch that
track migration of an individual.
So you recently co-authored with Tim McQuaid and Franklin Chien a paper called "The Effects of Rent Control
Fine.
Expansion on Tenants, Landlords,
Oh,
and
it's kinda
Inequality: Evidence from San Francisco." First, if you would talk about the data.
So yeah, we have some really cool data.
really quick.
So traditional data sets, you can get things on the distribution of earnings and income, things like that, but you won't also see their migration.
Is that too bright?
So we have
I
this,
could probably turn
you could
this
call
off.
administrative data, which tracks people's address histories.
Too
And
dark?
where did these migratory data come from?
Okay, turn
We
this
bought
thing
them
on.
from a company called Infutor. They
Or,
are
actually,
a
hold on.
company
I think I know
that
what it is. It's
works
not-
in identity
necessary.
management. So they have this history of addresses for everyone, which they collect from a number of different sources and stitch them together, which
That, and then
is very useful
it might just be
for
the
the private sector and
background.
firms that need to keep track of up-to-date addresses. But from a research perspective,
another
it's
light,
super
too.
exciting data because it's so big and
It'll
so
connect.
detailed.
it's on. Oh, there it goes.
Armed
better?
with this super exciting
I
data
think it's better. Yeah,
on
yeah,
individual
There we
tenants,
go.
Diamond and her fellow
Now we're
researchers
lit
set
up.
out to measure some of the long-term effects
Let's measure
of
that.
rent control in San Francisco. They made particular use of a change in the city's rent laws. San Francisco had rent control,
better?
but it didn't apply to many of the city's
I think it's better.
smaller.
Oh no,
apartment
it goes
buildings.
dips down.
And the exemption
dips
was
down in
basically
brightness.
thought of as, well, these are mom and pop
there.
landlords. They don't have market power. They're not corporations. So we don't need to regulate their rents. And then
I think that's good. That's fine.
newspapers reported that those smaller multifamily
think it's
buildings
the
were
brightness of
increasingly
that one
purchased
earlier.
by, corporate entities, because that's really where you could make your money
it
in the
might just
housing
be-
market.
Oh,
And that led
weird.
to a vote in 1994, where everyone in the city got to vote about whether we could remove this small multifamily exemption.
Isn't there
And
like
that
a
would then
contrast one, too?
expand rent control not just to the large multifamily housing stock, but also the small multifamily housing stock. And that indeed passed.
So you've got this awesome new law, awesome for you guys at least as researchers, that lets you mark before and after. It's a perfect little natural experiment with a control group, and then you've got these wonderful data sets, and then you mash up all
Gamma.
these data together and analyze it, and you find the following.
What's
Your paper
Gamma, though?
concludes that among
Clearly
many things,
nothing.
quote, rent control limits
Is that
renters'
400?
mobility by 20% and lowers
White
displacement
balance.
from San Francisco, especially
Ooh.
for
Oh.
minorities. So
It was at
let's
44.
start with this. What does it mean exactly that renters' mobility is lowered by 20%, and why is that important?
So we look at
So if I turn the
whether
shutter
the
to-
renters
oh,
who
I
get
can't
access to
change
rent
that.
control choose to remain in their newly rent-controlled apartment. So we find that they're 20% more likely to remain there relative to our control group renters who don't get access to rent control.
So that seems totally unsurprising, yes?
Yes, I more see that result as a validation that our data is good and high quality and we have something to work with here.
Okay. Further, you write that rent
Okay, we
control
can get those. Oh.
lowers displacement from San Francisco. What does that mean exactly?
So we can look at not just whether you remain in the actual apartment you lived in when you got access to rent control, but whether you remain in San Francisco as a whole. We find rent control has a dramatic impact on whether you actually live in San Francisco or not. So it prevents those renters from leaving the city as a whole, which I think from a policy perspective of rent control advocates, that's one
I don't know if I like her.
talk about
She might be powerful.
displacement from the city.
And then you write that especially from minorities, that displacement is lowered.
Right. So when you look at that first cohort of renters that already live in the city at the time of rent control, it is definitely helping minorities more, preventing displacement of them, especially.
Furthermore, you write that landlords who are susceptible to
I
rent
like those
control
little
will
slow motion
reduce
things.
rental housing supplies
I don't
by
know.
15%
Hers just-
by converting to condos, selling.
I don't
to
think I unlocked this one
occupants,
either.
or redeveloping buildings.
I don't think I locked those other two.
So now
Ones
it
I don't
starts to get
have,
a little
you
more
know.
complicated. Can you talk about who's now starting to win here and who's starting to lose here?
So obviously when the landlord is first notified about rent control, he or she can quickly deduce that his or her rental stream is going to be lower than previously expected. And
Hey, yo, it actually looks
just
pretty
like
good.
any
It
other
was good enough, at least.
business
Actually, is the
owner,
audio good?
they might think about changing their business strategy.
I'm assuming
So
it's
if
fine. I
renting
mean,
out their apartments is no
the
longer
audio
very
in there.
profitable,
I split.
now they may decide, oh, maybe it's worthwhile.
I split up the
to
two things
convert
sources
to
now.
condos and
Luckily.
sell off the apartments to
that.
owner
Free
occupants,
loot.
and that would be a way to recover some of this lost
I'll have
income.
to check that out.
Or another thing they could do is say knock down their old building and build some new construction, and either sell those as condos or rent them out as apartments. Both of those options
The server
would
crashed.
avoid them
Oh,
having to pay this
aha.
tax of rent
There
control.
you go.
Help recoup some of their losses, which is good for the landlords, but is going to undermine the goals of rent control because now we're going to have less rental housing out there available for rent control.
So you can start to see how rent control may be accomplishing a narrow
Oh,
short-term
yeah.
goal,
Huh.
making existing housing more affordable for a select group of people, at the expense of the long-term goal of making a city more affordable generally.
When you pass rent control, the landlords of the property suddenly getting covered by rent control are losing so much money, they no longer really want to rent their apartments out at the prevailing new prices, so they decrease their
Start
supply of
challenge.
rental
I
housing
don't think I've ever
to
done
the market, and if there's
This
less
looks a little-
supply,
Let's
that's
see,
going to
it's
drive
different.
up prices.
So let me just make sure I have it pretty straight. You find evidence that rent control increases gentrification, one component of which
these.
is the displacement of low-income tenants.
Right.
On the other hand, you also find evidence
Doesn't
that
matter which one.
low-income people, including minorities, at least those who are in rent control units already, they're likely to
Oh,
disproportionately
wait.
benefit.
So I'm
from rent
assuming I can
control.
go to this
So
one
if
first.
I'm an affordable housing advocate,
Gives me
I might
that,
say, oh,
and then I
fine,
switch it
fancy
over,
Stanford professor, who I'm sure has
and that
some kind of
finishes it.
great income and/or housing subsidy and/or situation. I don't care that some landlords.
mean
are
I got both? Oh, yeah.
suffering. I
Oh.
don't care that the policy
This is pretty
having
chill.
some downstream effects that you don't like. I need to make sure that low-income people aren't going to get a rent increase of 50% overnight. So, how do you respond to that argument?
So when you think about those initial tenants, that's the best bet you're going to get for the benefits of rent control to low-income tenants, the people that are already in the housing. But even though we find that those tenants are much more likely to stay in their apartment, when we look, 10, 15 years later,
Hey, yo.
the share of those 1994 residents that are still there is down to, 10% or so. So 90%
cool.
of them no longer
Cool. Some
live
free
in that
loot.
initial apartment. And it's that next low-income tenant
Oh.
that wants to live in the
These
city.
can't be rotated.
That low-income tenant is going to have a very hard time finding an affordable option because now there's going to be less rental housing. The prices that low-income tenant are going to face when they want to initially move in are going to be higher than they would have been absent rent control.
Yeah. It
I'm
does
curious
help stop
how
a little bit of greed.
generalizable You think your
a little bit,
findings
but
from San Francisco are for other
that's
cities?
I would
it's a slippery slope when it
suspect
comes
that
to
the
regulation and stuff.
actual quantitative
Overregulate, you break
loss
stuff.
of rental
Underregulate,
supply or benefits to the
you know,
tenant will depend a
people
little
take
bit
advantage
city
of
to
other
city,
people
but
like
I think the
way too much.
qualitative takeaway that landlords are savvy and are going to work hard to not lose money on
That's
their
the
investments.
only sad thing
I
about
think
this
is a very
world.
general point.
Very, very greedy people can be.
For economists who already felt confident in the theoretical arguments against rent control, research like Diamonds provides empirical evidence that essentially tells the same story. Yes, there are some winners in rent control, but the losing is more widespread and longer term. But how about empirical evidence from a reverse angle? That is, not when a city adds or expands rent control like San Francisco did, but when it gets rid of it.
So there's other work by David Otter.
No, I gotta
who
wait
looks at
13
the
hours.
removal of
No.
rent control in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1994.
By the early 1990s,
Hey.
Cambridge was one of the
Yeah.
few
I guess we're good.
remaining rent control
We
strongholds
did it.
in
We
Massachusetts.
claimed all of our stuff.
Landlords have been trying to get rid of it for years, but there are a lot fewer
Said something about my mail. Oh, yeah, there it is. Here's all
Any
my
attempt
rewards.
to change the local law was voted down.
I
Finally,
like
the
rewards.
rent control opponents had a winning idea. Put the issue up on a statewide referendum where there might be less empathy for all
Oh,
those city
all the
dwellers with
rewards are coming in.
low market rents.
Can I just claim all?
When the referendum was
Yes, I
held, nearly
can.
60% of
Cool.
voters in Cambridge
So,
were
I mean-
opposed, but statewide it passed.
I don't know if it's
And so
really
Cambridge
worth
began
me
to
doing the.
deregulate
Oh,
its rents.
I know.
Years later,
That's
a
something that's
trio
cool.
of MIT economists examined the effects
Hey,
of
bundles.
removing rent control.
Okay, so the classic paper on this has been written by
Is
David
that
Otter,
five?
Tarek
What was
Bafak,
that,
and Chris
5?
Palmer.
Ed Glazer again.
It
100,000.
showed that when units
I have like a
were
million.
brought out of rent control, their
have bought,
owners invested in
I think-
them. So they upped the quality of the units. There was more of a
Maybe
supply
that
of
one?
higher end
I think I
housing.
bought this one.
They find
Yeah.
that the
Then I
rent control
bought
apartments
one of these, I think.
experience a lot of renovation. The landlords renovate a lot, and
And
that
I buy
drives
this, though.
up the desirability of
23
moving those
days remaining.
apartments. Also, they find that creates spillovers
Not about that.
onto
Oh,
the nearby.
Oh,
apartment buildings
tomorrow,
that they
sick.
themselves weren't rent controlled.
I'll be
So
able to get whatever
neighboring
that
apartments
gives me.
became more valued as a result of the end of rent control. And the most
that-
recent paper has shown that crime has gone down, particularly
is
street
that?
crime has gone down right after
What
the
is that?
elimination of rent control in
Tuesday,
Cambridge.
anyways.
So it looked like rent control had
Modify the
negative
stats of-
externalities
oh, huh.
on the neighborhood.
I really haven't bought anything else other than that. I mean,
So
you can
what does
see
economic
where's that
research
thing
tell
at.
us about rent control?
It's the
There
event
are at least two
on.
conclusions, which, if I'm reading it right,
You see how
sort
much
of
I
work
spent on
against
this game,
each
which
other.
is
The first conclusion is that rent control
oh,
doesn't
is
help
it over?
many people for very long, in part because it constrains the supply
no way.
of affordable housing. The
Oh, it's
second
right here. Yeah.
conclusion
Oh,
is
no.
that
This
just
one.
getting rid of rent control
So I
does
spent
not,
up
in
to
and of
here.
itself, lead to more affordable housing. In fact,
honestly
a
quite a bit of
deregulated
money.
housing
40
market can
bucks.
easily lead to
I like
less
the game. It's pretty
affordable
fun. So I
housing.
mean,
The
Why not?
Boston-Cambridge area is
So-
one of many places experiencing
I don't know
steep
if I wanna
shortage
spend
in
that,
not
though.
just
That's
affordable
kind of
housing, but housing
expensive.
overall. So
And
even
almost
if you
$100
accept
bucks,
that
I
rent
do enjoy
control
it,
is
but
a
not
big
that much.
contributor to the affordable
That'd
housing
be kind of
problem,
cool.
getting
But
rid of it isn't necessarily the
160
solution.
bucks, almost probably worth. I'm
You can
pretty
see
sure
why
it's
politicians and
equivalent to
policymakers
$1
are
each, right?
confused. In Massachusetts,
Oh no, it's
in
even
fact,
less than that. I might
there's
even spend
currently a
$100 bucks
movement
already.
to
Oh no.
bring back statewide rent
No.
control.
Oh yeah,
And
actually, yeah.
as we mentioned earlier, Massachusetts
It's probably
is
about
not alone.
so wow.
So we
I
just
probably
had
spent
this
about
big
close
vote
to
in
$100.
California
Ooh.
about whether we should repeal
Let's
a
not talk
statewide
about
law
that.
that restricts the scope of rent control in
What is
California.
this?
And indeed, we did not repeal that law.
So somebody read your paper.
Proceed.
It was interesting to see how our results were used by policymakers and the media on both sides of the fight, because indeed some of our results are make rent control look good, other ones make them look bad.
Yeah.
You got to read the whole paper and take it all into account to make a decision, but
We
it
talked
was a
until
very
the mic.
policy relevant
The
paper
mic.
for that
Is it
discussion.
in a
I'm
good
curious
spot?
what you can tell us about the political
I
dimension
guess
of
it's in the.
rent control. I may be wrong, but I believe that rent
It's in
control
the-
is generally supported by Democrats and generally opposed
I
by
guess technically
Republicans.
it's out of
I
the
think
frame, but that's
it's a
fine.
simplification to say all Democrats support rent control, but
Rent control.
I think in the short run, you can see
Short
the
run.
benefits of rent control. Like
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the tenants right away benefit. What's much harder to see are these indirect effects that take a long time,
What
and
is-
it's harder to put your finger on that. The losses are spread
I
everywhere.
don't remember
a little
doing
bit
this.
and harder to see.
I think I remember
walking down
doing
the
this,
street or
but-
talking to your constituents.
There certainly are some poor people who can benefit, and it's a very tangible benefit, right? It's not some complicated thing which requires you to trust in the market. It's just sort of very clear. And if you think that people on the left, many of them, just don't trust markets to begin with, then saying there's going to be some
Our challenge.
negative market effect to them, that sounds like capitalist hocus pocus. Whereas what they can see right now is that Mrs. Ray's rents won't go up because of their regulation.
Economists tend to believe their models and say, end of story, and believe me, right?
That is Vicky Bean.
But communities don't necessarily have to believe economists, and so economists need to do a better job of responding to the very real fears that communities have.
Oh.
Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Now she's a law professor at New York University.
It's probably not gonna hit.
Berkeley Center for Real Estate. Research.
Why is this guy so tough?
The Carmen Center has embarked on a project that we call Not Your Grandmother's Rent Control, to try to figure out if you were starting from scratch and you were designing the most efficient rent regulation system, what would that look like?
Coming up after the break, what would that look like?
You really need to have a holistic look.
And what about rent regulation for commercial properties, like all those empty storefronts in New York?
First and foremost, I'm an angry New Yorker.
Come on. Ah, that was pretty easy. Continue.
This episode is brought to you by AARP. 10 years from today, Lisa Schneider will trade in her office job to become the leader of a pack of dogs. As the owner of her own
We're all
dog
half-
rescue, that is.
halfway
a
through
second
that.
act made possible by the reskilling courses Lisa's taking now with AARP to help make sure her income lives as long as she does. And she can finally run with the big dogs and the small dogs, who just think they're big dogs. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Learn more at aarp.org.
Why is she not saying the other part? Did the game
A
glitch?
next level moment from AT&T Business. Say you sent out a gigantic shipment of pillows, and they need to be there in time for International Sleep Day. We've got AT&T 5G, so you're fully covered. But the vendor isn't
I think I like the flashiness. The other ones aren't flashy like this. Like someone's going on. You know? I like this. I like the mech and everything. It's so cool.
See ATC.com/5G for you for details.
My one brain cell is overloaded.
Once upon a time, Amazon Music met
I am
audiobooks,
stuck.
and listeners everywhere rejoiced.
Like you want. No. Why? Why are you trying to go to Concho? Just letting you know I'm streaming. No, you're good to stay in here and talk, but just letting you know. Huh? And you lost it? Oh.
As we've been hearing,
Did you?
economists are
Oh,
generally
wow, you did.
opposed to rent control. It rewards some people, but fairly arbitrarily. It punishes many others and generally doesn't do much to improve overall access to housing. That said, most people don't think like economists or even believe them, which is why many politicians and members of the public
Reverse.
think rent control is a great idea.
Well, I'm in favor of
Well, hiding it?
residential rent control, rent regulations.
That's David Eisenbach. He teaches history at Columbia University. He
Oh.
ran for a citywide office in New York called Public Advocate. There are, in New York City, about 3.4 million apartment units, nearly 1 million of which
I don't think
are
I've used the other ability.
New York's rental market is incredibly expensive, as it is in many other cities.
I don't think I stayed here long enough to.
Economists argue that overall high prices are
Or she has like the fat sword.
rent. What is Eisenbach?
I think I have to do these twice. That. And now I should be able to.
New York are high. Blaming it on rent stabilization.
So I'm not really sure how.
Not it. The consequences of getting rid of either rent control and or rent stabilization
Yeah, I mean,
would be the immediate
it's usually she.
displacement,
Oh, no, I still have
okay,
4.
of a big portion of the population.
So she'll at least do
And
one
that
more,
would
right?
just be cruel at this point. I don't know how anybody could justify, even somebody.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have
looking at
brought
an
all of
economic
them. I still have
term,
what's her name.
How anybody could justify that in just in human terms? You're gonna blame the high rents on rent control?
Okay, so Eisenbach does not
So she
believe
has that.
economic research on rent control. What does he believe in?
Well, first and foremost, I'm an angry New Yorker who walks around the streets of New York and sees empty storefront after empty storefront and just feels like.
I want to say this. Oh, wait, I guess I don't have the bottom part right there.
Along with its residential rents, and some parts of Manhattan, as much as 20% of the retail space is either vacant or soon to be vacant.
And I found out that there is this bill called the Small Business.
Maybe I'll get on here. Oh, yeah, I have to get the other star or whatever that is. Oh, there we go. Yeah, this is it. Right there.
So I ran for public advocate.
Right here, right here.
This bill, it's going to save small business in New
Bam.
York City.
Yeah, there's. It's like cutting out audio or
Did
something.
not win the election. He came in 13th, field of 17, but he did get a fair amount of attention for talking about all those empty storefronts, which have upset a lot of people.
There are two major provisions of the Small Business Jobs Survival Act. One guarantees a 10-year lease renewal offer from the landlord to the tenant for.
There we go. You actually said it.
Commercial lease in New York City. Number 2, landlord and tenant cannot come to an agreement. They go to legally binding arbitration. And that arbitrator then will pick a fair market rent, which will then be charged in the next 10 years.
Opponents of this proposal
I got the sword
commercial
for her.
rent control.
Oh, yeah, there we
This bill,
go.
Small Business Jobs Survival Act, is absolutely not rent control. It doesn't put a limit on how much rent can be charged, which is the very definition of rent control. It's legally binding arbitration. Much different.
Are there other cities that have this kind of small business jobs protection on the real estate front that works well?
It's going to be unique.
There we go. Then activate this.
Even though Eisenbach lost the
Bam.
he still
I like
believes
this
that
big
small
blade.
business jobs
It's so
survival
epic.
may get through New York City Council. I was interested to know what the economists think. Rebecca Diamond of Stanford, Ed Glazer of Harvard, what they thought about commercial rent regulation.
So I'm also very interested in that, and I also know almost nothing about it. I've never seen any work on it.
You could easily tell a story where the threat of some form of rent control makes the vacancy problem worse in the short run. So, for example, I don't want to rent right now to a lower-end tenant who can fill my space, which I'll be locked in by the rent control law, and I've got that tenant forever. So that that means I'm going to really
Scorched through the void.
Tenant by having this threat of this law over my shoulders. So, do I think vacant empty storefronts are come? Sure. I mean,
Now you're gone.
really as an urbanist, where I think it's unattractive to have.
No,
everything.
no, it
But
took
I'm
too
also
long.
still right as an economist, right?
Adjust
Because,
lineup.
You know, someone's got space to sell.
Oh,
There are people who
no.
want to buy that space. Why isn't the transaction happening? Right? It's sort of
How do I get
the
rid of 'em?
market is going awry.
Replace?
And the answer to that, of why the market is going awry, is not
I really
immediately
don't
obvious.
have
There are, of course, plenty of theories
The-
as to why so many storefronts in New York
anybody
are
else
vacant.
upgraded.
Here again is
You're the
Vicky
only
Bean,
one.
the former
You're gonna
prison
have to
official
do
who
it. You're
studies
gonna
the
have
real
to
estate market
carry.
at NYU.
I think there are a lot of questions about how commercial rent regulation would work and how it might interfere with an efficient market. One concern that I would have right now
You're gonna have to carry.
we seem to be in the middle of
I don't know how much this one does damage.
of a transition in retail in general, right? Because of the availability
You're not
of
dying very
internet
fast. It's
retail.
level 70. Oh, no wonder.
But there are
I don't even think her weapon's even that high enough.
Many of these storefronts formerly
That is
held
epic too,
services,
not gonna lie.
and I don't think the nail salon has been made obsolete by Amazon just yet. And secondly, the
Yeah.
rents,
Oh,
the
what the heck?
asking rents, at least according to the most recent real estate board
They're
of New
connected
York
to something.
report,
Do I have to kill him?
many of these areas are still sky high. It's not like there's no demand for areas where you're charging $300, $400 per square foot to rent these areas. In the long term, all of the economic support for both the landlords and the tenants is to get those units occupied and to get the rent payments again. for the landlord.
Landlords, whether small or large, are often left out of public discussions about property markets. And if they're not left out, they're usually drawn as villains. Vicky Bean, in thinking about the project that she calls Not Your Grandmother's
I
Rent
thought that.
Control,
I honestly don't know how she works really
I think
though.
the thing that you really need to focus
Sure,
on
but
is
I don't think I think
how
close,
to make
right?
sure that
Yeah,
the
I'm definitely not gonna be able to do nothing on
landlord
this.
gets a reasonable return, right? Because otherwise people will take their money and put it elsewhere and they won't quit building. And how can we at the same time
Surely,
sort of
right?
close
This will get them.
some of these avenues that landlords could use to try to escape rent regulation without it becoming a system that's so weighed down with so many different enforcement challenges that it kind of collapses of its own weight. You need to pay attention to the different ways in which property owners are making money on the property, so you really need to have a holistic look. At the same time, you need to have very open eyes view of the kinds of costs that we're imposing.
there's one huge cost that drives real estate.
Oh, this one's kind of cool. It's not as epic as the
Rentals
other
or
one.
Sales,
Come on.
both commercial and residential.
This is the last one right here.
So, in New York City, for example, a very high percentage of rent goes to property taxes. So we can't
That's so cool. Oh,
be saying
yep.
to landlords, hey, keep prices down, but by the way, your property tax just went up by 10%. So we have to recognize that, okay, we as a taxpaying body have an obligation to understand the effect that those increases may have on rents, and we can't just turn around and say to the landlord, you absorb them, right? Don't pass them on to the tenant, because that's an unsustainable system.
So it's certainly true that renters implicitly have to
The
pay
true
property tax.
form.
It's not obvious that's wrong, because the idea of property taxes is they're paying for city services, and renters use city services too. That's obviously not wrong.
So here's the big question that I really hope you can answer, because I've wondered this for a long time. Some of the biggest property owners in a city like New York, and some of the wealthiest property holders generally, are universities, religious institutions, hospitals, and other not-for-profit institutions, which makes them either partially or wholly exempt from paying property taxes. So I'm curious, how does that exemption affect, A, the taxes paid by everyone else, and how does that, B, ultimately affect housing prices for everyone?
First of all, clearly you're right. The government has decided to subsidize certain institutions by enabling them not to pay property taxes. And from a purely accounting point of view, those taxes
Oh, it's taking so long. Oh, there we go.
On the other hand,
Oh, there's still one more.
the institutions that we're talking about
Of
have
course, there's one
proven
more.
extraordinarily important to the economic health of the area, right? we're subsidizing university students.
I mean,
right? We're making it.
I'm not doing terrible damage, but I'm definitely not going to have the 100 and whatever time.
Well, we thought that somehow or other it was a good idea to subsidize educational institutions at one point in time. We thought there might be some
Oh, I didn't
spillovers
realize
from
you could
that to
swatch between the
encourage
two.
people to become educated. But we should be open to investigating that. And anyway, you shouldn't take my word
I had
for it.
no idea you
That's
could.
what I'm employed
While
with.
you're acting. Oh,
So, we can ask whether or not the blanket property tax exemption that we've given to religious institutions and educational institutions is appropriate. I mean, that seems like a reasonable question to ask. In the case of religious institutions, it in some sense goes back to, fundamental issues about separation of church and state in the U.S., but we can still ask this question. I would be surprised if we think that changing those tax rates is the number one step to take to promote affordability in New York City relative to, bringing more space on the market that you can actually build on, changing the regulations. I mean, it seems like that's not likely to be the case, but it is true that, you move stuff to a religious or educational use.
I don't think I'm going to win this.
Away from it.
I'm so low of HP.
Also correct.
So, what have we learned about housing, especially affordable housing, especially in the most desirable cities? For starters, we've learned that it's complicated. Property taxes play a large, underappreciated role in driving up costs, and the tax burden isn't necessarily spread so equitably. Rent regulations, meanwhile, appeal to the public and politicians, but they also create
That's
perverse
unfortunate.
incentives that in the long run work against affordable housing. How about housing vouchers? Aren't they a more flexible way to subsidize housing?
The advantage of a voucher is you can go through all
Yeah, I
those
don't think I'm getting those
eligibility
ones.
requirements and really target the voucher to the families that you think are most in need. And we, in New York and in many other major cities, we have prohibitions against a
the seals
landlord
right?
using a tenant because they're using a voucher rather than earned income.
No, it was too. I guess we'll just return. I did
Resistance
collect a lot
from
of
landlords,
stuff.
because if you have a federal government
Oh,
that shuts
gotta go
down
all-
and isn't paying its voucher
Actually, I don't
payments,
even
and there the landlord is
I gotta go
stuck with
where?
that,
All the
right?
way down
Or if you
there?
have a city
Oh, how many floors
like
that is?
New York
Oh, I've already
City
gotten.
did, that issued
Oh,
vouchers
I was
and
literally
then
on the last
changed its
one.
mind
Okay.
and said, oops,
Well,
that
we'll
program
probably have
is
to level
over.
up anyway, so.
Then the landlord has a tenant in
It's all
place
good.
who no longer can pay the rent, and the landlord has to take them to court and bear the cost of that.
Meanwhile, the market price of housing in a place like Manhattan lies somewhere between punitive and prohibitive. Here's what we heard when we took our microphones outside to Bryant Park in Midtown Manhattan.
Manhattan rent, onerous.
Astronomically high.
That's too expensive. Way too expensive.
That's why I live in New Jersey.
And what these people think about regulated rents?
Rent control sounds like a dream, man.
Rent control sounds good.
It's really key to find all those stabilized rent buildings. If you do, I think it's golden. If not, it sucks.
Whoa.
Full disclosure, I did do economics.
Have I done a lot of these?
Market failure.
So what if I do?
So if rent control is
I got a ticket?
a viable tool in the fight for affordable housing, what is?
The most natural tool towards affordability is supply, and to make sure that we are making it easy enough to build moderate cost rental apartment buildings in these cities.
Oh, hey yo.
We've used regulations to
I guess I was completing
restrict
this
our
whole
ability
time.
to provide affordable housing units.
That's the last one,
now
yeah.
we're at this restricted, frozen
Huh.
in amber form. In the case of New York, gosh, New York is
Whoa,
it's hard to imagine
okay.
how much housing.
So
we
that's
need
not
to
part of the
safely
main
New York.
story. It's part of this event.
Where you live, Boston is
Oh,
facing
I
what
mean,
it calls a historic housing
it is a
shortage.
quest,
The city's
main quest, I
growing,
guess.
not enough housing to match. What do you suggest
Not the main
Boston
quest that
do
I'm
to
probably
accommodate
needing
that
to
surge
do,
other
you
than
know?
letting the market work its famous magic?
Look, drive around Boston. It doesn't look overcrowded to me, and I don't think it should look overcrowded to anyone else. There's a lot of vacant industrial space that could easily house tens of thousands of units.
Hey
We've
yo,
made it
I got a
easy enough to
subscriber
build.
within
I've got to think that this is
in
this is
20
a-
hours ago.
a
That's pretty
doable
cool, actually.
problem.
I
You
could have
know,
swore it looked like it went up just like
engineering and
1
economics,
subscribers,
politics,
but
of course, are
hey,
far more difficult.
that's better
What
than
specifically would need to be done
I
to
have
change
in the
it?
past. I don't know how
the
long.
big answer is you need as of right zoning that
So, I
enables
mean, that's
fairly
pretty
high
cool.
density levels.
I'm having
over
subscribers.
a fair amount of space.
Actually, I want to
So
kind of see what it looks like
currently,
on
Boston's
a
zoning
phone.
plan is highly antiquated. every project is handled on an ad hoc basis.
I think I go to my
Usually
channel.
involves
Oh, actually, it's right
variances
there.
that are quite high from the original plan, which means that they're
Okay, so
highly
this is
subject
the
to
actual
a
stream.
judicial challenge.
I want to see what it looks
All
like
of that
in
is
the
a
other
recipe for
part. So like if you're
uncertainty and
scrolling
delay in
through,
endless community meetings. The thing that works best
look
is when you
fine?
have something where you've decided in
look
advance
good,
this
look
is how much we're
bad.
allowed to build.
Yeah, right here. Here we
a couple of simple
go.
rules that you've gotta
Hey,
follow.
yo, that's
Come
so
here, bring your
cool.
units and make it happen. And that's what's needed. That's what actually works. It's not
Oh,
something
look.
that involves
Oh,
a
there you see
10-year
that.
negotiation
Right here.
process, but something that says, here are the rules
There's
up front.
me. Yeah, that's so cool.
It should be noted
Well,
that
let's
not
do a,
all U.S.
pow-pow.
cities impose the same level of red tape you see in Boston and
Can I
New
just
York.
spam that?
and
Does
San
that actually do
Francisco.
stuff?
If you want to look for affordability,
I'm trying to go.
the
Oh, it
American
actually
Sun
shows
Belt
it on the
is
stream.
the Atlantas,
I think, right?
the Houstons, the Dallases, the places that
Hey, yo,
made
it
very
does!
easy to
That's
build
so
over the
cool.
last 40 years.
Oh,
And you wanna
man.
ask why Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, and Phoenix each added 1 million people
let's go
between
back to
2000 and 2010 as metro areas. It's because they make it astonishingly easy to build. And, you know, you can go and you can buy a great-looking house for a fraction of what you pay in New York. in
Bro,
these
that
places.
is
And
actually kind of cool.
it-
So
you
whenever
know,
I do
we don't have affordable housing prices.
Oh,
in the
so it
US
shows other
nationally.
people
We have
too.
lots of affordable housing
Yeah.
places with names like Atlanta,
Bro,
but just not in New
actually,
York City.
this
Many
definitely gonna be
European
fine on
cities,
TikTok
meanwhile,
too.
are more like
You
New
can kind
York.
of see the
In
chat. I mean, the
fact,
chat's already
exaggerated
there.
versions
So I
of New
mean,
York.
do you
Much of
really
Europe
need?
is
Do you
quite
really need to
restrictive
have
in
both
your
chats?
cities,
So I mean,
But I am
that's
much
pretty
more
cool though.
comfortable about
That's
the idea
awesome.
that much of Central Paris
You need to have
is,
like
you
a
know, patrimony of the
I have
world
chat
and needs
right
to be
here,
protected.
so-
While policies
Anyway, but
vary
yeah.
from city to city,
I think I might head
country
off
to
though.
country, almost all major European cities
I might
have
go ahead and
rent
try to
control.
probably finish the rest of my
Sweden,
homework.
of course, is
This is
the
already almost over
place
the
where Assar
podcast.
Lindback,
So.
the famous
I'll probably
economist,
end it off here.
although he was
thank
market oriented, he certainly
Ah!
skewed to the left.
Didn't hear that.
Nasser
Wait,
famously
does that
said
actually make a
that
noise?
short of bombing, I know of no way to destroy a city that was more effective than rent
It
control.
does.
And he certainly had Stockholm in mind.
Right now, there are around 10 million people living in Sweden. Around
Okay, so it's not necessarily the buzzing you hear. You just hear the other. I
were
wonder if it's just
standing in a
interference on
queue
this end. Then.
waiting for an apartment in
I don't know.
Stockholm. That is
Yeah.
5%
Thank you for
of the
watching.
Swedish
Catch you
population.
later.
That's the
Bye-bye.